Welcome, Professor Mehmet Asutay. Uh, Professor Mehmet is a professor of Middle Eastern and Islamic Political Economy and Finance. He's a director of Durham Center for Islamic Economics and Finance in the Business School. He teaches and supervises on Islamic political economy, Islamic moral economy, Islamic banking, finance, and management. And his research interests also include political economics of Middle East, Turkey, and Kurdistan. So thank you very much for coming on today. Professor, it's a real honor to have you on.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
Research and published works are incredible to look at, and you have a lot of knowledge on the subject. So I'm keen to tap into your knowledge today, inshallah.
Hopefully, we'll learn from each other.
So first of all, could you just tell us about how you got into this subject, how you became a professor, what interested you about this particular subject? Yeah.
I think from my university years onward, my discontent with the neoclassical economics. Of course, I studied economics in my undergrad, master's, and PhD. The disconnect of neoclassical economics with the real life and the way it constructs the everyday life by imposing certain value system, which is alien to most of the local value systems in the globe, resulted in me questioning the validity of the assumptions and the theories, as well as the policies of the existing conventional system. And therefore, in my PhD, I moved into political economy rather than economics, looked into the intersection between agencies and structures, and how that is shaped through perhaps a multidisciplinary understanding. But perhaps multidisciplinarity is not enough, although it is an important jump in terms of understanding social reality. But in itself, perhaps it is not enough, because transdisciplinarity is what we have to look into in order to be able to respond to the problems that we have in social reality, or in constructing everydayness. Because the way, when we look at, unfortunately, economics have a different realm: sociology, politics, psychology, anthropology, and etc. These are all running parallel to each other, but the intersections, unfortunately, is not there. So that intersection became an important curiosity for me to understand. On top of that, of course, the inability of the conventional economics in responding to problems, but also importantly, providing people with the opportunity spaces to have access. I related that to the intersectionality between disciplines, resulted me looking into other systems, including Marxism, but also Islam as well. Marxism, of course, has certain responses, but that wasn't enough for me in terms of understanding the value theory within political economy. Because while we're running away, while we aim at running away from capital domination, of course, Marxism would explain the value theory through the domination of labor. But Islam, within its political economy, within the Tawheed, the ecumenical, aims at considering all the stakeholders equally and consider their interest in the production function or the modes of production in an equal manner, and integrate all of the stakeholders in the equation. And therefore, not only my belief that because I'm Muslim, but also my intellectual conviction was an important part of moving into Islamic moral political economy, and look into the dynamics, how the world can be a better place through constituting an Islamic moral political economy. So that has been my learning trajectory in terms of how the morality has to be the essential criteria through which economy, as well as the economic behavior, as well as the other behaviors, should be shaped. In other words, what we call embeddedness, the behaviors, whichever the realm is, economics, politics, has to be embedded into the value system of a particular ontology, and in this case, Islamic ontology fully shapes the behavior. So that has been very much the trajectory of my learning, as well as the conclusion that I have ended with.
I see, and I think it provides a good entry point for my next question, which is, you mentioned Islamic political economy. For my listeners who are not academics, who are not familiar with it, what is Islamic political economy?
In everyday life, of course, Muslims are constrained with certain behavioral norms. In addition to be acting within the goodness and justice, and contributing to other people's and the other stakeholders' life, it is essentially also important to have certain structural norms, such as the prohibition of interest, giving of zakat, the alms giving. These are important institutions and behavioral norms. But in a very simple sense, the suggestion has been over many decades that as long as the Muslim behavioral norms are there, whatever the system doesn't matter, whether it is capitalism, as entire world now is dominated by, that should be okay. But political economy in general and Islamic political economy suggests that the behavioral norms have to be substantiated by certain structures. And those structures are essential in order to sustain the behavioral norm. In other words, if you are operating in a capitalist economy with the Muslim behavioral norms, you will end up mostly what we can produce then hybrid identities. Hybrid identities in the sense that in certain realms we are Muslim, but when it comes to certain other realms, our behavioral norms have to comply with the conventional. And also with that idea, of course, Islamic banks and financial institutions have emerged, but again, in their operational nature, because they have to take the definitions from the capitalist economy, what is capital, what is labor, and all those definitions. And therefore, the outcome of that process is very much, again, hybridity. In other words, Islamic banks would operate with the same definition of capital and capital efficiency in the same way a conventional bank. Of course, the Sharia compliant process, looking into what is halal, what is not halal, provides a certain quality of Islamicity in that, but the essential, the foundational definitions in everyday of Muslim life, wherever we are, unfortunately, is dominated by the existing capitalist system. So therefore, Islamic political economy, moral economy suggests that, look, perhaps this temporary or the hybrid identities that we are exhibiting in different realms in life, including economy, is something perhaps in the short run may take us to a certain point, but in the long run, the objective is to constitute a particular structure for Muslims as well as an alternative paradigm for economy, within which the whole ideals of Islam can better be constituted, articulated, and practiced. And therefore, Islamic political economy would look into, yes, behavioral norms are essentially important, but that behavioral norm has to be supported by certain structures that is necessary for Islamic ideals to be dominant. For instance, those of you, I'm not sure whether you have studied economics, but in the economics, the whole objective of economics is as the defining individual in a particular way, and the methodological individual in a particular way. That individual is rational, self-maximizing, maximizing utility, maximizing profit, whatever it is. And that is very much the basic, because the ontological nature, where this knowledge comes from, enlightenment defined individual in a particular way by removing divine knowledge from the equation. So human is hegemonic, has the faculties and therefore is rational. With that, unfortunately, what we have ended up, the environmental crisis, the climate crisis, the human tragedies that we have around us, and even in normal circumstances where there is no war, individuals one way or another have been instrumentalized for economic objectives. So it is no longer the happiness of individuals that is the end, but it is the corporations and their gains are the ends, and how individuals as well as the other stakeholders such as environment can be instrumentalized. Islam suggests beyond that. Within this political economy, when you bring the structures and the behavior together within that structure, within that ecumenicality, tawheed, the ecumenical, the totality, suggests that everything complements each other. Everyone complements each other. So I complement you, we complement environment complement us, we complement land, and etc. So the complementarities bring the unity of Allah. And therefore, the interests of all the stakeholders have to be taken in account within the structural expression of society. In other words, from the initial, what I call the initial equation, when we bring everything together, what we call the modes of production, so what we have, not only capital and labor, as capitalism and Marxism has been doing, but other stakeholders have to be considered in the initial equation, so that when it comes to the distribution of gains, everyone gets something out of it. Such as nowadays we talk about sustainability, but the initial equation remains capital dominated. So how we are going to achieve sustainability if we do not recognize the other stakeholders such as environment, climate in the initial equation? It's just moderating the consequences process. However, Islam, because of establishing through tawhid this complementarity, the stakeholders, everyone's interests linked to each other. So if I want to grow, my growth is one way or another linked to yours. My growth has to be in harmony with yours, which implies that I am constrained with the opportunity space that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala recognized for you, or our growth will be constrained or shaped by the opportunity space is required for the environment to sustain itself. So this linkage, direct linkage in the initial equation makes the Islamic political and moral economy as a distinct fact and distinct paradigm for us to understand. And therefore, it is this three important questions when we talk about political economy beyond economics, because originally, even in the conventional sense, the narrative started with political economy. Adam Smith and others were very much political economics. They looked at structure, agency, a relationship, behavioral relationship within a complementary manner. But later, with the specialism that was introduced as a result of enlightenment, unfortunately, this compartmentalization of knowledge, economy, has been a distinct part and divorced from the others, and others the same. However, Islam, because of the tawhid, the complementarity, the unitarity, does not consider knowledge as compartmentalized areas, but the intersectionality of it. The totality can only be expressed only through intersectionality. Economy is part and parcel of the entire knowledge base of tawhid, of revealed knowledge, and cannot be therefore a distinct from that knowledge base, the cognitive knowledge system. And with that, of course, what we are referring is the value system of Islam directly determines the structures, what institutional forms that should exist, and also the behavioral norms of individuals in society, in operation, any part of the realms that we are referring. And that will produce an embedded outcome. entirely the behavioral norms embedded into the value system of Islam or other ontologies, Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism, whatever it is. But it is not the market that determines behavior and structures, but it is directly a revealed knowledge which consider the totality of those relationships. In other words, as the French scholar Bourdieu would say, it is not the prices that determines everything, which classical economics, neoclassical economics will tells us that, but it is everything else come together to determine prices. So that distinction, everything else, the interactions in society, all those different factors coming together to determine prices is a distinctive part of political economy as part of the social laws governing the society, and therefore the behaviors and institutions are embedded into the knowledge base, revealed knowledge base in our case, but in other cases, a particular value system of that society is very much important and distinctive nature. And therefore, the three questions: one is, what is your value theory? In other words, whatever we produce, a pen in your hand is £2. How do we come up with that £2, considering that £2? And therefore, market economy, neoclassic economic capitalism will tell you that as long as it is exchangeable in the market, that will determine the price. Or socialists would consider the use value. As long as something is useful, it has a value. But Islam considers that no, everything has value, regardless of the exchange value or the use value, because Allah created everything else. And therefore, it is heavily important as a distinct value theory. Similarly, how we bring together the second question, how we bring together the factors of productions to establish our production model. Capitalism will consider capital dominates. Socialism or Marxism considers labor dominating. Islam suggests that no, all the factors all the stakeholders comes together, constitutes a modes of production for us. And thirdly, the distribution theory. In other words, when we do the production, who is going to get what, how that is determined. Again, Islam directly considers that each of the stakeholders goes to the equation modes of production independently rather than defined by capital or labor, and therefore, including land, environment, society, will be considered an essential stakeholder. And therefore, it's very much very sophisticated and complicated understanding, but that should not deter us, that sophistication and complication should not deter us considering that as a potential, because people are after simplicity, but the simplicity of the market has lost the values. So we have to bring back the values in order to respond to the problems that we have around us.
I see. It's very, very interesting. So, in essence, human behavior is supported by certain legal structures, and Islam provides those structures. We have, zakat. We have no interest, no usury. We have other laws about trade and so on. Everything being fair and justice in commerce and so on, and that will have effects, ripples on society and the social norms.
Certainly.
And the fact that we know everything comes from Allah, everything belongs to Allah. He's dominion of heavens and the earth.
Yep.
We can't kill a sheep without, we can't hurt an animal without Allah being displeased.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
we have to treat nature in a way. We have to value it as well as part in part of our economic transactions. And so
Certainly.
that's a difference between capitalism.
I think therefore the simplicity, it perhaps serves certain interests, but unfortunately when it comes to constituting a system understanding, it doesn't have. Such as you mentioned, riba. The prohibition of riba is an amazing divine judgment on how to organize the accessibility to resources, because Allah created all those resources for everyone to have access. And the problem is, of course, the domination of capital and the political forces prevents people to have access to resources. And therefore, prohibition of interest in particular is essential for us. And unfortunately, despite the fact that we came up with Islamic banking, but we didn't define what is the definition of capital in Islam. Because the whole prohibition of interest in Islam directly relates to the definition of capital. Otherwise, it is not instrumentalization of A is selling to B, I'm moving capital from A to B, so how I can do that? That instrumental morality. However, Islam considers substantive morality. In other words, by prohibiting of interest, it's not how to facilitate A is selling to B or transferring capital from A to B. On the contrary, directly defining capital, saying that, look, capital, because of its power, it can get the political power as we have today in the world. No, that power, by prohibiting interest, we are reducing the power, we are relegating the power of capital to the same level with other stakeholders so that capital cannot be dominant. Now, that has huge implications for human welfare, for the welfare of other stakeholders such as environment and climate. Again, so it implies that capital cannot do whatever it wants because it has the power. Okay, it has to be in line with the same normative basis. It cannot be dominant. So it has to be on the same line, on the same level with other stakeholders. Similarly, zakat, everyone, well, not necessarily perhaps everyone, but majority of the people within the Muslim world as well would consider zakat as a charity. No, zakat is not a charity. It is the right of society to be given back to society, right of society. How that implies, Allah created all the resources for everyone to have access. With privatization, we are preventing people to have access to resources. So what happens, therefore, those people or companies which privatize, they have to return, they have to compensate the society by excluding society from the accessibility to those resources. And as you can, it is an amazing dynamics here. There's an amazing narrative, but unfortunately in everyday life, we relegated zakat to charitable meaning rather than compensation for expropriation. Similarly, riba prohibition, interest prohibition, again, the expropriation because of the power of capital, and therefore it is prohibited, a particular definition of capital. And as a result of this, and therefore when we put together all these statements, what we are ending up a different political economy, how agencies, structures, and norms working together to produce a different ways of organizing society around the resources. That is what I call Islamic moral political economy.
Yeah, I find the political connotations of zakat quite interesting because a 2% wealth tax in the modern day would require that rich individuals have some liquidity available to liquidate their assets and then give them off to zakat, to charity, and circulate in the economy, which improves the circular flow of income, which actually makes everybody wealthier. But nowadays, there is no incentive. Rich people keep the wealth hoarded up and locked up, reduces it.
Certainly.
The velocity of money is low, and people are impoverished as a result. So there's a lot of interesting political connotations with the legal structure.
Certainly, but also importantly, when it comes to zakat, because we mentioned it's a compensation for the expropriation, and therefore, when we look at, for instance, in the fiqh in Islamic law, what we end up with when it comes to agriculture and livestock, for instance, you are expected to give directly an animal from your livestock as your capital. Is not the money equivalence of that. Okay, it's not the money equivalence. If you have a number of camels, number of lamb, whatever it is, you are expected to give a certain number out of that as zakat. And also, let's say that, and also your, such as in the case of camels, it has to be younger than 2 years old. And also it has to be female. So look at the logic that for the Islamic logic as compared to conventional logic is very much different, because Islamic logic aims at giving accessibility to resources for everyone because Allah created the resources. Conventional logic, however, aims to accumulate it for those people who have the power, who has the ability to accumulate. By giving a camel younger than 2 years old, you're providing an opportunity for those families who receives the camel as a zakat, a young camel, and the female, which implies that there will be milk, but there will be offsprings as well. So the empowering nature of zakat. But in modern times, unfortunately, when it comes to capital gains, it is only 2.5%, doesn't do the justice when you compare, for instance, giving camel or certain amount of your wheat that you have harvested and etc. compared to capital gains we have. And therefore, FIC has to consider the change in the economic structures that we have and respond to that by coming up a complementary new ways of arranging zakat for the capital gains, such as you might have 10 or 20 flats or houses in Birmingham, but you will give only 2.5% zakat out of your rent in the current system, out of your rent. However, the agricultural guy, he has to give out of his capital, he has to give animal. So that distinction, again, is important for us in terms of resource accessibility definition of zakat, and new look is hugely needed in zakat calculation, and hopefully Sharia scholars, we can bring it to the attention of Sharia scholars to respond to that. But the amazing nature of this, amazing nature of zakat in terms of empowering people who do not have it. Because an important part of Islamic political and moral economy is ihsan. Justice is essential, but with justice, if we cannot establish equilibrium in the society, because the whole objective, Allah created the world with a mizan, the balance. So our objective is to sustain that balance. And therefore, equilibrium has to be sustained. And therefore, if justice is not enough, adala is not enough to establish that equilibrium or sustain that equilibrium, what we have is ihsan. Ihsan suggests that in this context, within the Tawhidi understanding, the interests of all the stakeholders have to be considered, okay? And therefore, who are up here better off, they are expected to contribute to the life of others so that they can be equals. And when we look at, it is very common in our circles, references to Surah Al-Baqarah for the prohibition of interest. But when it comes to resource accessibility, unfortunately, verses such as Surah Al-Nahl 71, when it talks about this ihsan, there isn't much references in our circle, because that directly suggests that you're not supposed to accumulate capital, but establish this equilibrium in the society.
Mm-hmm. And this brings me on to my next question, because I think particularly the environmental challenges we're facing nowadays with climate change, environmental degradation, just the destruction of the landscape, the soil, overfarming the soil, all these environmental problems that are happening right now, it really presents or allows Muslims to put forward some of the ethical principles we have in our deen, such as zakat and the prohibition of usury, and the general principles of the ethics of charity and sadaqah, to really champion and deliver social justice. So my question is regarding like Islamic finance. What we see from Islamic finance today, like we have the Islamic banks doing mortgages and things like that. We have a few new Islamic fintech startups. It's a very nascent scene right now. But yeah, my question is, to what extent is our understanding of Islamic finance a medieval administrative system? Because what happened was, at the time when the Prophet and the Khalifas, they were in that time, they took on the administration of the Persian and the Roman empires, and then they implemented God's law on top of that. So a lot of it is like a very medieval system, like for instance, how the contracts arranged and so on. How much of it has evolved to the modern day? For instance, we have like futures markets for agricultural commodities. Like some scholars would say that would be haram, but in today's age, you would not have items in the supermarket without those futures markets. So those kinds of questions, how do we navigate these problems?
I think this is not only our problems, but a lot of people who have certain ethical search, they are asking a similar question. On the one hand, we want to uphold the Islamic value system, including environmental concerns, for instance, eradication of poverty, removing climate risk and all that. On the other hand, we want to have accessibility of the goods that capitalism can provide with. This is a huge dilemma, not only for Muslims. I think the awareness is very much essential. I mean, this debate we are having always, and what I capitalize this debate in, we want to be Muslim, but every one of us wants to have Dubai. And unfortunately, that doesn't work. Not only because of the Islamic identity, the resources in the world is no longer able to sustain the particular consumption patterns, production and the consumption patterns we have. Even if you leave aside religion, including Islam, and their constrained understanding of the world and expectations and ethicality, even if you leave those aside, the world is not going to be able to sustain the way we are consuming. It's not possible. If you look at data, for instance, unfortunately, it's not in front of me, but as far as I recall, when we look at the resources that is considered to be enough for each country in the world, we see that most of the countries, they finishes those resources even before coming to the end of middle of the year. Some countries finish the resources that is considered for them in 2 months, 3 months, 5 months, 6 months, and etc. So the world,
they import some countries like the Middle East, they import everything.
Yes, and the resources therefore is not enough. So therefore, the major problem we have in front of us, regardless of the value system, you have the reality, the resources are not enough. And also what we see, climate problems, environmental problems. In the middle of summer in Europe, you end up floods that we have seen, earthquakes and all that. And the climate, the environment is no longer able to carry the burden that we humans impose on environment and climate and the land. And therefore the important concept, the amana, the trust, for us, all the resources, including the humans that we have around us, is a trust which implies that we have to treat them within the within the form of that trust. Why? Because the growth, the tazkiyah concept directly tells us that growth has to be in harmony with other stakeholders. My growth has to be in harmony with yours, environment, climate, and the resources available. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created everything and everyone with a potential to grow towards their perfection, and that opportunity space has to be given, including environment, land, climate, and etc. all the humans. So within that, okay, when we look at, unfortunately, since 1990s, the huge expansion in financial accessibility created further burden on the environment and resources. Now, because everyone has access to the credit cards, fintechs, and etc., the resources, everyone has become a huge consumer in the process. We want to have everything. It is no longer the need economy that we are talking, but it is the want economy. Everyone wants to have. The social media in recent years compelling individuals to have it because they have seen in social media and Instagram somewhere, and therefore they need to go and have coffee there as well. The compelling nature, unfortunately, the psychological impact that we have in our consumption pattern. And simply, regardless of the value system, world resources, however, and the development in climate and environment tells that, look, They are not going to be able to afford that. The resources are not enough. And those who are rich and powerful, they will have access to resources. Those who do not, unfortunately, they won't be able to. And the debate that we had with the Pakistani flood, for instance, on the one hand, Americans will consume in an amazing level, and they will create all the carbon emissions. And the result of that will be in poorer countries who do not have such consumption pattern and also carbon emissions production. So one enjoys, the other suffers. There's no justice in that as well. So therefore, considering all this, the financial expansion is the reason that we have all. With the further expansion, the future markets, the hedges, and etc., all this expansion that we have, the hedge funds, all these toxic instruments have resulted in expansion of the financial realm, but created what we call fictitiousness. It's total fictitious. There is not such capital. It's just the movement of capital from one place to another. One's debt is considered an asset in the others. I mean, just a simple example, in economics term, we would teach students that all the economic activity culminates in what we call GDP, gross domestic product. And when you look at each country's gross domestic product, it is lesser than the total financial assets in the country. How that happens? The tension, therefore, the total assets in the financial system is much larger than what we have in our GDPs in real economy.
Yeah, in the financial markets, the amount of derivatives that are flowing around, the liquidity in derivatives is like 100 times more than the actual spot markets.
Of course,
I work in pension fund for finance, and we have like limits on how much derivative products we can
use. Yes,
but we have to do it's mostly spot. But when you look at the markets, that's like the spot markets for, like, let's say bananas is like very, very small, but the markets for bananas is like massive.
Certainly.
And I spoke to someone and he said there's a rule in Islamic finance where you can either pay now and deliver now, you can pay later and deliver now, or you can pay later and deliver now, but you can't pay later, deliver later. So that cuts out all the speculation in futures markets, exchanging contracts.
Certainly, because Islam rejects, therefore, fictitiousness. Okay, you cannot have fictitiousness in Islam. In other words, you have to have something tangible that you can use financing for. But unfortunately, with the global financial system, everything is fictitious, and therefore the total assets of the financial system is larger than whatever the resources we have. So that creates a tension, therefore the Islamic qualities. Unfortunately, of course, market is pushing Islamic finance as well to come closer to that point, and we have seen Islamic finance, of course, moving towards that end, unfortunately. But the original Islamic value system, including fiqh, aims at overcoming the fictitiousness. Financing has to be related and backed by a real asset. There's certain exceptions, such as in the agriculture, the futures market, because such as you have apple orchard, and the apples will be in the futures, but you need financing today. So in certain circumstances, such as in agriculture, certain constraint, with a certain constraint, future market is acceptable, but beyond that, fictitiousness is entirely rejected. Similarly, the commodification process, because finance is expanding through the commodification. Three things in Islam in particular you cannot commodify: water, fire, and air. Fire now relates to the gas that we have in our homes, as well as the oil. So three things you cannot commodify. Look at the problems today in the United Kingdom. Okay, the whole commodification of natural resources such as oil and gas is wrecking the family life. There's huge bills that everyone receives because of their consumption of gas to heat their homes. And that's not acceptable because these are the natural resources. They cannot be commodified. And finance, however, is pushing the boundaries of commodification. You might establish here a hedge fund and control the waters in Australia, which you do not have any relationship, any ownership. So therefore, expansion in the financial realm, unfortunately, through consumption, increasing consumption, creates all those problems, including environmental problem for us, as well as the resource accessibility. Therefore, we have to be very much concerned with the expansion of the financial realm, and we have to bring financial expansion to the real economy, to contain it within the real economy in order to prevent all those adverse circumstances that we are facing today. And that is very much essential, and that is very much the Islamic political economy would consider within its own systemic understanding how to organize resource accessibility in the societies.
One of the other questions I had was regarding economic growth. So in the system we live in today, you have to keep on growing, right? You have to keep on, every year GDP has to increase, otherwise it's a catastrophe. We fall into recession, people lose jobs, they lose their homes. But economic growth means that you have to keep consuming more and extracting more resources from the earth. But the planet is finite resources, right?
Certainly.
So how does Islam deal with this issue, that the fact that like, is there a limit to growth with Islamic economics? Does it allow for continuous growth, or is growth defined in a different way? How does that all work?
This is very much important, again, in relation to sustainability debate that we have around us. If I was in a class, I would put this question on the whiteboard, would ask the question whether 5 is superior to 4, whether 5 is equal to 4, or whether 4 is superior to 5. I know it sounds very silly question, because from our early education and everyday life, we have been told that 5 always superior to 4. That's inevitable. But that is again a linear thinking, the Enlightenment ontology, as opposed to the religious ontologies, including Islamic ontology, because it doesn't consider a value system. So 5, therefore, because in a linear manner, 5 is always superior to 4. However, let's say that you have £100 and you are investing, and you have 2 portfolios in front of you, which one will bring you £5 in return, the other one will bring you £4. And let's say that you are Islamically concerned, therefore for you interest should not be there, but also environmental issues should not be involved, or human rights related businesses with human rights consequences should not be involved. Now you look at that, you see that, well, 5 has all those adverse consequences, and the return 5. But the other option that you have, portfolio 4, it gives you 4% return, but it doesn't have all those adversities. Okay, it doesn't have interest, it doesn't have human rights problems causing business returns, it doesn't have environmental issues. Now, when you impose value on that, now is 5 is still superior to 4? No, it is your 4, despite the fact that it is a smaller figure in the linearity, it is better for you compared to 5. And therefore, not having value system, and this has been the nature of conventional economics, because they have removed the values. What they declared with the Enlightenment, God is dead. So you're free to do whatever you want. Therefore, you can maximize. However, Islam suggests that no. And therefore, the constrained world, okay? The constrained world, of course, rationality is there, but bounded rationality. Therefore, when there's an interest there, you cannot go, despite the fact that rationality would tell you. So it's bounded rationality. So the part...
Just if I can try and summarize and understand. So in essence, risk is mitigated in an Islamic system, and when the problem is the assignation of value. So you said 5 is greater than 4. The problem is we're thinking that it's a 5 in the first place.
Yes, it is always because the linear thinking.
Yeah,
However,
like, right
when
now,
you impose the value, it could be the other way around.
yeah, because right now you could have an economy which is healthy and then an economy which has an oil spill. But when you have an oil spill, you have to clean it up. And when you
Yep.
clean it up, that generates GDP. But it's not
Mhm.
actual value. You've destroyed
No,
some.
it's not. It's not indeed. And therefore, we have to be critical of the existing system and the particular value system that it imposes on us. Okay. And therefore, not only Islamic, of course, Islam has certain claims and strong claims, but within the ethical realm that we can see now as well, people are making choices in relation to that ethicality. But another question, again, in response to what you're asking, I would ask in the class, whatever you have around you, is it a right or a privilege? Of course, again, within the conventional understanding in everyday life, we would immediately jump to say that, oh, it is my right. Like, I have to have it. No. Islam, as well as the other traditions, would suggest that, no, it's a privilege. What you have is a privilege. The environment, the people around you, environment, land, everything is a privilege. And therefore, the amana concept, the trust concept, it is trust. Therefore, you have to look at. So bringing all this together, therefore, Islam suggests a constrained behavior. So my behavior is constrained with your interest to grow as well, with environment's interest to grow, the rububiyya concept and the taskiya concept. So therefore, within that, we cannot have this linear growth from one year to another. Is not possible because the resources will not allow you, because the constrained behavior is there. So for me, I have to create such an optimization that everyone and everything's growth has to be ensured. Or non-growth has to be assured. So my growth, if it is undermining your growth, I cannot grow. If our growth is undermining environmental growth, and then we have to stop there as well. So therefore, considering the interests of all the stakeholders in the initial equation will bring the, within the Islamic political economy, will bring the constrained world of optimization rather than allowing this free hand, we can do whatever we do or we want to because we want to grow. Now that's not possible. Resources are telling us today with all this flooding, earthquakes and climate change, heat waves and etc. It's telling us that no, the earth is not going to be able to afford all those anymore, and we have to withdraw. Therefore, the importance of the growth is essential for us, and we have to consider that. And sometimes the growth, sometimes establishing that that equilibrium between different stakeholders are important for us to consider.
I see. So Islamic economics brings about genuine growth, non-fictitious growth.
No, certainly. And perhaps sometimes no growth.
Yeah. Although I would say, like, I think personally, it's my own belief, like, Allah is, the provider, al-Razak. And 100 years ago, there were only 1 billion people on earth. And now there's 8 billion. And still people are not dying from starvation, as in the earth still produces enough food for all the humans and all the animals, which means I feel like even if humans continue to grow in population, Allah will still provide for us. Like the food will still come out of the ground. So we will still have natural growth. There's just a fictitious growth, which
yes, certainly. It's the fictitious growth, and also we have to understand the fictitious nature of consumption as well. Okay, and the waste that we are generating as well. These are important factors for us to consider. Okay, of course, Allah is the provider, and He will provide. But accessibility is the way excessive consumption that we are creating. That's the problem. The pressure that we are creating on the resources, rather than establishing that sustainability. For instance, as I mentioned with the social media, we have this difficulty. We have to have it. We have to consume it. With the financial inclusion narratives, everyone has to have access to finance. So that creates the fictitiousness, unfortunately. Everyone increases their demand, unnecessary demand. And so it is no longer what I need, what I want. And that what I want is creating all the pressure on the resources that we have around us.
Mm-hmm. I see. And okay, that's very, very interesting. So how the Islamic economy just naturally things a lot better because it has the structure in place to solve these problems from ever happening in the first place. Prevention is better than cure, as they say, and that's what the Islamic economy
yes,
does.
certainly.
Yeah,
certainly. Therefore, sustainability debate we have now is allowing us to pollute, and then it creates the moderating the consequences. As opposed to that, however, Islamic understanding is because of the initial equation, you have to recognize the interests of all the stakeholders in the initial equation. You have to tackle the problem at the heart.
mm-hmm. Indeed. Anyway, thank you very much for coming on, Professor Mehmet.
You're most welcome. Thank you for having me.
Running out of time now. Yeah. Yes, I've learned a lot. Thank you very much for coming on.